you ever watched a movie or read a book and you really get connected to the main character or one of the characters, and then usually they experience some conflict or a traumatic event, and the whole rest of the story, you're rooting for them to overcome what they need to overcome. We may be going through something either small or big, and the whole thing is just trying to get over it, get through it, get around it. There's a story that I love in the Old Testament. It's the story of Esther. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend reading it. And just a short little synopsis of it is Esther, who's just an average young Jewish girl, finds herself, she becomes queen of Persia. And as queen of Persia, she ends up in a time where one of the king's right-hand men want to annihilate her people, the Jewish people. It's a very scary and dark and traumatic time for Esther. And then Esther's cousin Mordecai is able to reach Esther, and here's what he says. This is one of my favorite passages in scripture. It's in Esther chapter 4, verse 14. He says this. He says, Esther, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. You have come into your position for such a time as this, for such a time as this. And friends, here's what I believe. I have come to believe that in our lifetime, if we choose to follow Jesus, we can have that mindset each and every day with big things that we go through and even small things that we go through. Because too often, like the movies or the stories that I told about, if something happens and it frustrates you or something traumatic even happens, the whole time we're thinking, oh, this too shall pass. Let's get through this. How can I control this so I can wrap this all up and it'll be over? However, God has created us for such a time as this, for right now, right here, this present moment. It might be a scary moment. It might be an irritating moment. We're in the grocery store and you're in a long line and it's not moving fast enough. It may be a frustrating moment. Maybe your kids are bickering with each other. It might be a traumatic moment where you lose a loved one, or you even lose a relationship, or maybe even there were times, especially last year with COVID, you came to a point where you were feeling so depressed and lonely or anxious or fearful and sick. And yet God says, instead of pushing through it and trying to get around it or scoot around it, but actually stopping and slowing down and remembering that God is here in this present moment with you, and he truly has equipped you with all you need. I remember seeing my friend Hannah, who is a nurse, post on Facebook a picture, and it said, for such a time as this, during the height of the COVID pandemic. And she was saying to everyone, she's saying, you know, we as nurses and in the medical community, we can look at this as something we're trying to just get through until we can go, okay, good. COVID's over. Now we can go back to real life. But instead of that, she sat in the moment and she said, wait a minute, I am equipped for such a time as this. And friends, so are you. When we follow Jesus, he gives us everything we need. And he wants to bring us peace in each moment, no matter how irritating or as traumatic or tragic the time will be. He wants us to meet us in the moment, and he wants us to flip the switch of our mind and say, wait a minute. When I'm in a long line at a grocery store and people aren't moving, for such a time as this, I can be patient and I can show love to the cashier. Or maybe you're with your children and they're bickering and they're frustrated with each other. You can say, wait a minute, God's equipped me right here and right now to show my children how to love each other for such a time as this. I promise you, friends, if we stop trying to barrel through life and slow down and sit with God and be present with him and remind ourselves that he equipped us for such a time as this, that we will be able to find peace, find joy, find hope, find love, because He's going to be right there in the midst, giving us the strength and everything that we need to get through it. So 2 things I want you to do. 1, read the book of Esther. It's not long. I promise you won't regret it. And number 2, have the for such a time as this mindset. As soon as you feel angst or frustration or fear or dread, stop, slow down, and remind yourself that God has equipped you with everything you need for such a time